Most paintings rely on a concept to have a unique presentation. However, before you can do a unique presentation, you really need to think about mastering some of the skills and some of the techniques that are going to be tools for you to become a better painter. So I think of the pencil and eraser as the beginning. When I wake up in the morning, this eraser is the first thing I put around my neck. In fact, I have awoken in the morning with this eraser still on. And then when I get to my studio, next thing I do is pick up my pencil, because I think with a pencil and an eraser, you can start, stop, change. It is absolutely complete freedom. What I've done here now is, in this my 4th instructional video, is I've done a video where we're focusing on negative painting. Negative painting is a very difficult concept. It has to do with, first of all, it's kind of a nasty word. It's frightening, negative. However, don't think of it that way. Think of it as pretty much the space that surrounds your subject, but it can be even more than that. And I've carefully designed these lessons, first of all, so they have a real high success rate, and secondly, so they're fun and free. I think you're going to enjoy them all. And after the 4 lessons that I present, I have a friend of mine, Bonnie Broitzman, who will be also sharing with you her intuitive style of working with negative painting. So in the very first lesson, I'm actually not going to demonstrate this, but I just want to talk about it. And in this particular style, it's very graphic. If you look at all of the shapes of the stems, leaves, flowers, we're looking at positive shapes. If you look at the background, this nice warm color, we're looking at the negative space. So I always think this is a nice entry into negative painting, because what you do is you paint all of these shapes on dry paper in a lot of control. It's actually, I've done this with absolute beginners and they've always had a wonderful painting. So after you have completed painting all of these elements, then if you like the look of this breakout, it's not necessary, but if you like that look, you start by putting a masking tape around that section. And then you only mask the areas that are within the center core. And at that point, you're completely free to wet the paper and just float in all this wonderful color. So it gives this really loose interpretive style, rather than, often I think of negative painting as kind of tight and hard-edged because you're actually painting around all the shapes. But with this style, you get a really free, wonderful look. I have several other examples here to show you. This one here has, these are morning glories. And you can see I had way too much fun with this one. The breakouts, I decided to break out right onto the edge of the mat with it. You just pick colors that you enjoy. You're completely free to express, the sunshine, repetition of some of the colors, maybe some out of focus, just kind of the essence of these flowers out of focus. And then all of this fun stuff where you're breaking out. I have one other example here I'd like to show you. And this is the sunflowers. These are fairly large flowers to be blocking in with masking, but it actually didn't take that long if you consider that the taping goes over the image where it's breaking out, so you only have to mask those few areas that are within. And the best part about this is the freedom that you have later to do this soft out of focus. So what's really kind of magical about this is you're in control. You're always working pretty much on dry paper, and the only time it's totally wet into wet is when everything's protected. Next, I want to share with you the actual demonstrations. This one here is quite semi-abstract. In fact, think I have it upside down. And what we're looking at is an interpretation, in this case, of grapes, but the technique could be interpreted as anything. I had one student who cut her grapes so large they made terrific peaches, and her painting was fabulous. So it can, the technique can be, the concept can be interpreted into any subject that you'd like. What we're actually doing is I'm going to take some grape leaves and I'm going to use them as a stamp. The stamp becomes the positive shape. And then when you paint around this shape, which is a stencil technique, it actually becomes the negative shapes. So between stamping and stenciling, you're working with both negative and positive right off the bat. And then these little circles were actually, these grape-like shapes were actually created by cutting out wax paper circles. And I know it sounds a little tricky, but this can be a really challenging and really exciting lesson. Again, designed for success. You're going to love your results. The next demonstration is going to be total abstraction in the beginning, but then later, through negative painting, we're going to pull out some shapes. So here's an example of a work in progress. You can see I'm just concerned now about color, movement, line, direction, shape relationships, and I'm just thinking about all the elements of design that make a good painting. But after, I can come back and I can make this into anything I want. And in this case, I've been kind of in a rock mode lately, and I'm having a wonderful time, not only with color dominance. You'll notice the other one had a very warm dominance. This one has a very cool dominance. And I'm really thinking about movement. How are you going to move the viewer through the painting? And through the dark shapes that you can see here that are linking together this movement and creating the shapes. This was all done through negative painting. So I'll show you how to do that a little later. Here you can see we have another example, again of rocks. Here I've taken it a step further. I've actually created some very hard shapes. I'm creating elements in this where you can see the dark on this side is creating a light in the middle. Down here, that same shape becomes a dark with light on the inside. So I'm having fun with reversals. This happens to be dark on the outside, light on the inside. As we move around, it becomes dark on the inside, light on the outside. So we're having fun not only with reversals, this is just another form of negative positive. I'm also directing the viewer through the picture through my carefully designed negative shapes, which again are popping it out into rocks. And in our final lesson, this is probably the most difficult concept to work with, where we're working totally wet into wet, and we're going to be designing some negative shapes to pop out a subject, in this case hollyhocks. But we're going to do it on Masa paper, and there's been so much interest in working with this. I'm really delighted to be able to share this with you today. And this is an ancient Japanese style of working. We're giving it a little bit of a contemporary twist here. And what you do is a little gluing process first, which I'll go into, and then you simply do your painting where you're painting. Sometimes the positive, sometimes the negative. You do it all at once. So this last presentation will be an alla prima style of working. So let's get started. Okay, for my first demonstration, we're going to start with the grapes. And these are really fun because it's pretty obvious what's positive and what's negative. And it's got little tricks in there to help you with this fun and free part of it. One of the things I feel very strongly about is how important it is to do some kind of a value study. So you're thinking about, where is your pattern of darks going to lead the viewer through the eye? And I don't want the whole background to be dark. Negative painting is not black and white. It's also allowing some of the light of the paper to become part of the final presentation. So I'm just going to do a very quick value study. And we're going to start with some of the shapes that are going to be, for example, some of the leaf shapes. And of course you want some big leaf shapes. And then you want some of these shapes to be interlocking with one another. and connecting, like we could have some grape shapes in here too. And the grapes can go around and behind, underneath. And then we also want to lead the viewer off so they're touching the edges of the paper. Now I have two pens here. One is a 40% pen, the other is a 60% pen. And these are both in the warm values. I really love these. To me, this is what makes your painting a success from the very beginning, because you're already thinking about values. I don't care what color this is. I just want it to have good values. So if I come in here and first of all establish some of these 40% values, where they're going to touch off the painting, how they're going to connect with the leaves, move your eye through. And notice how I'm going around the shapes. This is negative painting. Now some of these are going to be a value. So I have a 40% next to a light value. Maybe over here I'll put a 40% next to a light value. And here I'm going to put a 40% value behind. Now as I go into my 60% value, now you're going to see the much darker shapes. And again, some of these shapes are going to link with the edge of the paper. Some of these could be kind of a linear shape. Some of them are going to be going around the grapes, connecting with the edge. And some of these could even be grapes that are hanging in the shadow, way back in the distance, forming a lovely dark but very interesting shape. And then we've got some of the tendrils. Now I did bring along with me this very nice, the entire grape branch. I didn't even bring any grapes, but they were hanging there too. And you can see these wonderful tendrils. So in some cases, it's kind of fun to have a few of the tendrils eking out too. Now I'm going to make a general evaluation here. I'm going off the paper in 4 places, and I want these all to be different. So maybe I could even go much larger here. Come down a bit, connect across, and then we're going to have some darks here. So this is the kind of thing that gives me confidence to start a painting. Now I have some general idea of where my darkest darks are going to be, where my lightest lights are going to be, where my rest areas are going to be, and then where my developed center of interest is going to be. So with this in mind, let's get started. Long rectangle. And what it is a half sheet, a simple half sheet. Only instead of the traditional half sheet, I'm doing it the long way. And the way I cut it, half sheet paper, I don't like to cut it with a scissors. My preference is to do this ripped look. So as long as you keep the pressure at that fulcrum right there, maybe push with your thumb, or you can just push from side to side, you'll always get a perfect rip, and it will give you that nice decal edge. And you'll want to be on the side where you can read the watermark, and it says Arches France. So I'm going to turn these both so they say Arches France. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start laying out some of these leaves, and I'm going to use this top one as kind of my layout, and then I'm going to place them down here on the lower one. And I'm looking for a variety. I want several leaves. So I'm also looking at my value study here. Get some nice big leaves, again interlocking, and some smaller ones. I like to have shallow water so that when I'm washing out my brush, I can go all the way to the bottom to agitate the paint and it never goes over the top of my ferrule. When water goes over the top of the ferrule and you tip it, that's when you can get drips. So I'm going to start by wetting the back. This is just a plain old 3-inch hockey. It's a nice soft brush and it gives me lots of water. And we'll flip it to the front side. And I'm going to start out with a wet into wet wash. And this is going to establish kind of the general feeling. If I start with cool colors, it's going to be probably a cool painting. If I start with warm colors, it'll be a warm painting. And I think I'm going to start with some warm colors. So I'm going to go into my Winsor yellow. And I always like to have my paints dry. So what I have here is basically a color wheel. This is the color palette, one I just dearly adore. So I've done a lot of research. I've thought about where I want to place my colors, and I have them set up like the color wheel. So this is my Winsor yellow, and then I'm going to use some permanent rose when I come in with some more warmer washes, and eventually I'll be getting into my blues. So it's basically half cool, half warm. So I'm going to start out with this Winsor yellow, and I'm just going to miss places. It could be in a rest area, it could be in an active area. Basically, I'm just kind of setting the stage. Get a few drips down here. I want to touch off the painting. Don't forget to move and go right off the painting. And then I'm going to go into my permanent rose. I'm going to put a little bit of the permanent rose in some of the areas where the grapes are going to be. But I'm also going to just put it anywhere I feel like it, because I just want to add a little touch of warmth to the paper before I start. But notice how many whites I'm saving. A very important tool that I use is my fine mister. And this is a little product you can probably find right in your home. And what you're looking for is that very narrow inner little tube. And what that does is provide this really fine mist. Doesn't give me little blobs of water, it just gives me a fine mist. So throughout the time I'm going to be working here today, I'm going to be keeping this wet. And for example, when I see an area like this that is looking a little bit hard-edged, I'm just going to soften it because I really want these colors to kind of flow together. This is basically an underpainting, and I just want soft nuances of color flowing through. And so I don't get confused with my blobber. Now this is a coarse sprayer. This is my fine mister. I also have a picture of my husband on it. So we'll keep that handy. Now I'm ready to start thinking about stamping some of the leaves. And these were picked this morning. Now ideally, I found that if you pick these and freeze them, and then you allow them to thaw, that they actually give you the best contact. So I'm going to have to tell you a secret. I actually froze these leaves a little bit this morning. They were in the freezer for about 2 hours, and it really did make a difference. And this is the easy part now. On the back side of the leaf, I'm going to put down the colors, and all pure color. I'm not going to be using any mixed color. I'm going to be using almost entirely color that is pure, dug right out of the wells, going directly onto the surface here. Because the surface is wet, it's going to give us a nice contact. And I even like the leaves that have had a little parts of them eaten away by bugs. I think it adds a nice character. And what I want to do is put extremely rich color. Now it looks like I'm using a lot of water, but I'm not. This is very lean on the water, very heavy on the color. And this time I'm going to go in, I'm going to add a little quinacridone gold. Oh, this is a beautiful color. It's a Daniel Smith color. It's one I'm very, very fond of. Now this is going to be an overlapping leaf. So we're going to have them touching. One thing you don't want to do is have these just equally spaced all over. You want to have touching, interlocking, very important. And then I do like to pick off the stems because they actually lift up the leaf. You don't get as good a contact. So I'm kind of staying in my yellows right now. I want to do some warm leaves. So this is a burnt sienna and a little quinacridone gold. I'm also going to put on a little Windsor yellow, Windsor orange, excuse me. And this one is going to run off the top of the page. So I'll move my paper a little bit here. And part of this is going to go right off the page. And notice how I'm pressing it down with a tissue. If I use my finger, you just get spots. But by using this like a little pad, it gives me a nice contact. Also notice I'm using a brush that has all the bristles cut into a butch haircut. So every bristle here is working for me. A round brush doesn't work as well. Now I'm going to get a little darker with this leaf. This is basically my quinacridone burnt orange. And go all the way to the end of the leaf. All the way to the end. And this time I'm going to put a little orange on it too, my Scarlet Lake. And if I want this to get darker, I would go directly into my Antwerp blue. And where I put the Antwerp blue on top of the Scarlet Lake and the quinacridone, I'm going to get a deep olivey green. So I think it would be nice to have at least one dark leaf. So, and use really thick, rich color. So important. And think of these as arrows. Think about the direction you want them to point. And we're going to do a few smaller leaves. Now I'm into the oranges. This happens to be a little Scarlet Lake, very bright. Now have some fun with color while we're at it. Cute little one here. And then I'm going to just stamp one more leaf for the camera here, and then I'll finish it up. Notice how I'm working on a flat surface. Okay, so I'm just going to keep stamping these and then we'll come back. Okay, we're going to continue now by making the grapes. And this was the part that was an inspiration. The leaves were easy. A lot of people have done this, but I thought, how can I make those grapes? And all of a sudden I remembered wax paper. So by taking and folding the wax paper many, many times, because I don't want to cut one grape at a time, I'll just simply come in and cut about 10 grapes at once. So keep your handy mister and periodically dampen the surface because we want to keep this just gently moistened, not soaking wet, just gently moistened. So what I prefer to do is to put some of these grapes into the light areas. So that's what I'm doing right now. Some of them are going to turn pink at this point, obviously, because they're going on a pink surface. And some of them are going to stay yellow. So whatever color I put them on, that's what color they're going to stay. I'm trying to get, I'm not overlapping these. I know that it looks like I'm overlapping them, but I'm not. Each one of these circles pretty much has its own space. Whoops, I need to paint some more little circles over here. So I'm going into what is pretty much permanent rose. Now I stay out of mixed colors. I have permanent magenta on my palette, but I don't want to make all the grapes the same. I want some of these grapes to be pink, some to be really deep pink, some to be kind of a cool, almost a blue color. Okay, this will be back. I've been having a little fun lately with some of these shapes that are in between. This tape is about negative and positive. Let's think of negative and positive. Certainly these are all positive shapes that we've added, the circles. The negative shapes would be considered the little shapes in between. Look at these interesting shapes. Sort of like paper dolls here in the old days. So I'm just going to take and rip up a few of these and put them down, because what I want to do is create some texture. And it's pretty nice. What happens is some of this, I can even paint these circles that are in between. So just because I want to have a little fun, I'm going to take and put a few of these unusual shapes and use them like connecting shapes. Now remember, if your paper's getting a little dry, keep misting it. Very important. I see we have a little bleed back there. Very important to keep this paper wet. When I put this leaf down on the paper, it becomes a stamp. But when I come in with color and I paint around this, now we're looking at this as a stencil. So one of the things I want to do is I want to now come in and do some dark shapes. Maybe that's a leaf shape, suggested leaf shape. See, one thing we don't want to do is to go around the entire thing. I want to build connecting shapes that go from this shape off the edge of the page over to this shape, through this shape, next to the grapes, in between the grapes, off the top of the page, maybe right through here a little. See, what we're doing now is we're building these wonderful shapes, the dark shapes that become the part that leads the viewer through your painting. So notice now, when I did my stenciling, which is the part where I go around the stamp, I tried not to go around the entire thing. I created a dark pattern here, but I left this in the light. This one I remember is dark, so I'm going to leave that one around the light. And meanwhile, I'm connecting, moving through the picture off the page. Now this medical gauze actually is folded over many times, so I do have to think about opening it up until I'm down to one layer. So you can see there were six times that it was folded over. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to cut off a little section. Now if you just put this down like this, it's going to look like a piece of gauze. We don't want it to look like a piece of gauze. We want this to look like a linear shape. So I'm going to pull and I'm going to connect, and I'm going to pull this down in such a way that I'm going to have some of these little ends sticking out, and then I'm just going to twist them and make them into some tendrils. Pretty cool. So these are going to become tendrils, and what's going to happen up here is where it touches into the paint, or where I choose to paint over it, these are going to become lines, connecting lines. So you can see here as I paint into that surface, they become lines. And if I want to grab a few more of these, I can twist these into tendrils. This is my favorite part. And again, this only transfers the color. What we're creating here is a wicking action. So the only way this is going to wick the color is if it's wet. So keep your fine mister handy. Put a little color onto it if it needs it. And as soon as you have color onto this surface, and you just leave it lay there until the paint dries, it's going to wick that color into the surface here. Well, this is a considerable time later. Everything is totally dry. This is something you don't really want to rush. The longer you leave it dry, the more crisp your image will be. So this is the big unveiling. We'll get to see what we have, and it can be a disappointment, and other times, ooh, see, now that's kind of nice. Ah, yes, yes. Remember some of our silly little shapes in the gauze? Everything here has served its purpose. It's created some linking shapes, some little textural shapes, and the circles, of course, have given us our basic image of the grapes. And once in a while you take everything off and you've almost got a completely finished picture. But in most cases it's going to require a little more finishing, and that was the whole purpose of this lesson. What I'm trying to do is create an underpainting. This is the beginning, and now through the skills of negative painting we're going to pull this together into a finished piece. Now these little circles are funny. You find them weeks later on your carpet, just about anywhere. Now we do have the basic pattern that I was trying to accomplish. We've still got some nice lights. That pleases me very much. But one of the things we need to do now is to come in and negatively paint and link together some of these elements. So again, I'm going to take my fine mister and I'm going to juice up my paints. I always like my paints dry. I never have to worry about them spilling out when I'm carrying them around. And I'm going to start out with some nice fresh permanent rose, a little bit of French ultramarine blue, and some Antwerp. We'll get some of these colors out here on the palette. And we're going to start thinking about coming in and painting around some of these shapes. Now I find a round brush works the best because it gives you that fine point where you can come in, get what you need, but then you can also paint around the subject to define it. The most simple thing to do at this point is to simply go around these shapes, pop them out. When you bump into another shape, just keep going. So I've got a lot of circles here. I'm bumping into the edge of this leaf. And as I do this, I'm starting to define the leaf. What I try to do is stay in that range. Now I'm going to warm this up a little bit. You can see I moved into a much warmer color. And all I'm doing now is creating one level of depth. I'm just popping out some of these circles. I'm bumping into my leaf shape here, bumping into the circles, but I'm only creating one layer of depth. But you have to start somewhere, so I'm happy with just one layer at this point. Now as I move along, I like to change the color, and I kind of let the painting tell me what's going to work. Over here you can see it's getting a little bluer, so I'm going to switch to my Antwerp blue. Again, I'm going to pop out the edge of this leaf. Over here I'm going to pop out the edge of the grape. Here's another grape shape. Here's some more leaf shapes. So this is pure negative painting. I'm just painting around the shapes. But one of the things that happens is you all of a sudden bump into an area that isn't a grape or a leaf. It's nothing. What is it? It's moving into this soft white area. This is when you need to use a little ingenuity. In this case, I'm adding just a touch of some yellow to it so I can change the color again. And then, because I don't want a hard edge here, I'm going to wet my brush, shake off the extra moisture, touch the extra moisture onto a tissue, and then I'm just going to lose that edge. And as often as I can, I like to come in and lose some of these edges so it doesn't become too hard. Here's another example of an edge I'd like to lose. So now you can see we've defined some of this dark area. We've changed the color from cool to warm to blue into a yellow and a lost edge. Very basic. Let's try that again. How about over here? I'm going to take some Antwerp. I'm going to add a little Aurolian yellow to it. And I'm going to make this area greener. And one of the things I'd like to do is start to define these leaves a bit. I don't want them all defined. I don't want them all hard. But I do want to show, whoops, there's another leaf. They're everywhere. Now you can see what's happening here. Every edge, including this edge here, is all hard. Don't want that. I'm going to wet my brush, shake it out. I'm going to take some of the extra moisture away, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to lose the edges that are not critical to the painting. I want that edge to get lost. I want this edge to get lost. And in some cases, I want little edges here and over here. So wherever I want lost edges, I just come in with the water, make sure it's clean water, and I'm going to lose edges. So now you can see we found some edges here, we've lost some edges here, and the whole thing is starting to flow together. That's basically what I'm going to do. I'm going to move around the picture one section to another. I'm going to find edges and lose edges. I'm going to find the edges by having crisp. I'm going to lose the edges by having a damp, just slightly damp brush, and allowing the edges to simply melt away. And I'm going to create another layer. So here we're going to find another grape here, another grape here. So you end up painting these little triangles that are going to make more grapes. Pretty fun. So we should now see another layer of grapes evolving here. Let's make this into another grape here. Let's find another grape over here. I'll tell you, this is like eating potato chips. It's really addicting. Once you start this negative painting, you can't stop. So now we have shapes in between the shapes. Let's create another grape right here. And let's create another grape right here. And maybe this one will come around. This whole thing a little darker. Now these edges are very hard, and either with my brush or with a soft tissue, I frequently will come in and dab them, just to give them a little bit of mystery, lost and found. And remember, these colors look very dark, but they're going to dry about 18% lighter. So don't worry about how deep the color is. Just make sure you're getting it deep enough. Okay, this is the final wrap up now on the grapes. And your biggest job, when it comes time to finally tie it together, is to get this wonderful value pattern connected together. It's easy to identify the positive shapes. They're basically the leaves and the grapes. But how are you going to tie the negative shapes between the grapes and the leaves and the leaves and the edge of the paper together? How are you going to get the viewer's eye to go from this side of the paper all the way to the other side of the paper? Well, obviously, because we've talked about it before, the best way to do it is to simply come in and form these little dark shapes, the little triangles that kind of identify grape shapes, and just keep working your way across. Now you can keep making more grapes. You can add more leaves by painting some more leaves and stamping them. But usually one of the easiest ways is to simply keep coming across with the dark shapes and eventually just identifying like the edge of the leaf, the edge of the leaf. And then because you want it to have a nice flow, some of these edges are a little bit too crisp. What I like to do then is to come in with a little water and lose some of these edges. So the ones that are coming out like this, I'll just take some clean water, lose them, lose them, lose them. So when in doubt, I've said this many times, but this is the most important lesson in this whole thing. When in doubt, fuzz it out. Because the last thing you want to do is create a hard edge that doesn't have any relationship at all to the rest of the picture. But we do want to get a flow of dark shapes or linear shapes or something that's going to take you across the page. I do have one other little trick I want to share with you, and that is the idea that you can actually lift out some of these whites or lights if they happen to get too dark. It's another form of stenciling. And what I usually do is I take a piece of acetate. This is something I can purchase at an office supply dealer. It's what runs through a photocopier. And because I want the shapes to be pretty much the same size that are here, I'm just going to take and draw one on here with my black pen. Take my scissors, and we're going to cut in from the edge and follow that shape around. And we're just going to make a basic stencil. And this is what really rounds out the grapes, and it gives you an opportunity to add lights. Because as I mentioned before, in transparent watercolor, we don't use any white or opaque color. So the only way we can save the lights is to paint around them, or sometimes to lift them out later. So I've got a regular old cosmetic sponge here and my acetate, and now I'm ready. If I want to come in here and select a spot, I can just simply lift away the color and come back to the light. And it really does make a nice touch, especially if you want to show the light coming in. And it gives kind of a ghost image in some cases. It's not always perfect. And I kind of like that ghost-like image. So you can add more grapes, or you can cut out a stencil like a leaf, and you can add these anywhere. Just pick a spot, take your sponge, and lift away the color. So in most cases, I've pretty much cleaned, I haven't done any cleaning on this one, but if you look at some of the other grape pictures that I've been working on, I pretty much clean up a lot of them, because I'm like that. I kind of, even though I like fun and free, I do like a lot of perfection at the very end. So I hope these tips have been helpful. I hope this is something you enjoy, especially with the grapes. And for the last thing, we're going to take a look at this in a mat. And you can see what a difference it makes. Anytime you're working with semi-abstract or abstraction, it really needs a little help with a nice mat. Realistic subject matter people can identify, they don't care about the mat. But there's just something that adds a final touch when you add a mat onto something semi-abstract. This time we're going to start out with total abstraction, and if you decide that you want to make it into rocks were just an arbitrary thing I chose because all these wonderful little negative shapes here can be just created later, and it's a good way to learn how to do negative shapes, and it's something you just pull in at a later time. But meanwhile, we're going to start this painting totally as an abstraction. We're just going to think about the movement, and we're going to think about light patterns and dark patterns, and we're going to think about linear shapes versus large dark shapes. And it's just basically all of the elements of design. And the way I like to start this is with a value study. And instead of taking you through this, I just whipped a very quick little value study up before I started. And you can see what's happening here. I try to design shapes that are going to take, movement of shapes, that are going to take you right through the paper from the bottom to the top. So we've designed in vertical shapes, but I've also designed in shapes that are going to weave and link their way through here and connect horizontally. And it's this grid of horizontal and vertical that creates the interlocking shapes that really make your painting have a real sense of design. We're going to try to touch off the edges. You can see here that I'm touching off in at least 4 places. So with our little value study in mind, we're going to get started. I'm working full sheet. First thing I have to do is to determine where the front of my paper is, which happens to be on the other side. I always like to wet the back of the paper first. I'm going to use the largest brush I have, which happens to be a nice big 3-inch hockey brush. Really holds a lot of water, facilitates getting the paper wet, and good and wet. So if you're wetting your paper with a small brush, just allow all the time you need to get that paper good and wet, fully saturated. So we pretty much have this side as wet as I want it. Now we're going to flip it over. I only like to flip it 1 time. Now we're ready to wet the other side. As you wet the paper, what happens is it starts to stretch out. And you've all heard about stretching your paper. And a lot of people do this. They take the paper, soak it in a bathtub, and leave it in there for about 10-15 minutes. Let all that extra water drip away, and then they staple it down. While it's stretched out, they staple it onto a board. Well, that's fine, and it's a lot of artists feel it's important because they like to work with a nice flat paper all the while they're painting. The main reason I don't do a lot of stretching and stapling and soaking ahead of time is I don't want to lose the sizing on the paper. The sizing is what allows the paint to float around. And if I soak it in a bathtub, it's just going to float away. So right now, all the sizing is still intact, completely wet. And I'm ready to start putting down some paint and letting it float around. So let's see, I'm going to start with some really nice warm color again. You can see, wow, it's really moving here. So this is really wet. Things are moving. And so I'm just kind of coming through, I'm looking at my value study here, and I'm thinking about shapes, allowing some white shapes. So you can see I'm kind of painting around some shapes. I'm kind of negatively painting. And then down here, when I get to the edge, I'm going to go right off the edge. Over here I'm going off the edge, I'm going off the edge up in here. And over here now I'm going to paint a big, like a big solid shape. But I'm also going to go off the edge with the color. And I always like to do a little bit of almost an airbrush action where we've got a little soft broken shapes. Now I want to start working harmonically. I'm going to go into my quinacridone gold, and I'm going to put that color right on top of the warm pink, and we'll just see what kind of a blended color we get. We're working our way through the page. And in some areas I'm going to let this yellow just kind of become in its own space. And in other areas I'm just going to let it go right on top. So now we've only worked with 2 colors, Permanent Rose, Quinacridone Gold. And I think that's all I need to do. my next step is going to be to start thinking about darks right away. And so I have this wonderful paper. This is a archival fibered oriental paper that comes from Thailand. And this particular paper is only 10 grams, so it's very lightweight. When I put this paper down, it absorbs the color immediately. So you can see that it's grabbing that color. I'm going to rip it, and I'm going to let this paper now become an important element in the design. I'm going to have some of this moving in what I see as kind of a diagonal movement throughout the piece. Again, I'm going to have this touch off the edge, move around into what would be like a negative shape. Sometimes it's going to be a big positive shape. But when I get to that cut edge, I usually rip that off because I don't want that hard cut edge within my center of interest. So sometimes I'll allow that cut edge to come in, for example, from the edge of the paper. And otherwise I'm very careful that I don't let that paper, that cut edge show. So right now I'm thinking about my dark pattern. And wherever I see my dark pattern, I'm putting paper down. Because this paper has no sizing, and it's going to become my darks. This is really fun. Painting with ripping paper. It's too easy. Now I'm going to get more and more developed right in through my center of interest. I'm leaving some areas very restful, very soft, because I like to have some of the areas restful. If the whole thing were busy, it would be boring. It'd be like listening to really loud music forever. A little bit of loud music's nice, but it's gotta be broken up with some soft music too. So I'm going to break out into these shapes. Notice how I don't have a straight edge like this. It's breaking. These shapes are coming in, interlocking, going through. So almost all of my edges are kind of interesting, not straight. In fact, I think I'll have another one that goes up a little bit higher because I didn't want them all in a row. So check your corners. This is kind of all in a row. Let's pull out a little piece, a little breakout shape here. There, so now I've got some nice darks. And the interesting thing about this paper, because it has no sizing, it grabs the color. So now I'm ready to start thinking about coming in with a darker color. And this happens to be my ultramarine turquoise. It's a new store-bought color. I'm like a kid with some candy. Wow. I love this color. And it surprised me. I found that when I combined this color with the pink, I got a purple. So that was kind of a nice surprise. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start weaving my way through here. Sometimes I'm going to be painting what would be like negative shapes in between. And other times I'm going to be going into what would be more positive shapes. So for example, if I wanted this to be a big dark shape, then I would paint it as a positive shape. If I wanted this to be a light shape with dark around the edges, I'd paint around it. So I'm going to go in and out of negative and positive. Remember our first lesson that I talked about? I didn't demonstrate, but I just talked about it. We painted only the subject, masked over it, and then painted only the background. With the grapes, we went between positive and negative, and now we're going between positive and negative again. So I'm going to weave my way across, around the shapes, painting the shapes themselves, going around the shapes, in and out. Now I just mixed a little bit of this purple and pink together. It's actually the pink and the green together. And look what I got. There's the purple. So I'm going to pull some of that out, break it up. And I've got the purple up here. I've got to weave my way through, come down, and pull a little bit of that color down here too. You never want to have the color in just one place. You want to move it around. Now, I want to make sure this stays wet. So I'm going to get my fine mister out, and I'm going to keep it damp. Keep the entire surface wet. And because I'm thinking of rocks, I'm now going to move into some wax paper. And the wax paper is going to be a texture maker. As I put this down on some of these shapes, it's going to create a texture. But it'll only work if the shapes are wet. Either white or color, either one. So I'm trying to keep the paper as flat as I can. I'm not really crunching it up. And I'm thinking in terms of all kinds of shapes. Long shapes, little shapes, small shapes connecting, moving. Here I want to break out a little bit. Over here I'll add another shape. I want to save some of these shapes as whites or lights. I'll cover up some of these with the texture. Okay, here's my gauze. This is just a good old medical gauze. It's available through medical suppliers. It's what they use to make casts. And it's all cotton, very important. You need to have not a real rub plastic kind, but this really easy to rip up. I love this stuff. It is kind of a beast to get unraveled. So now that we have it unraveled, what I'm going to do is simply cut off a little piece of this, and I'm going to stretch this and think of this as a linear shape that's going to tie this all together. So if I come up here into this open area a little bit, it'll be so subtle that it's not really going to busy it up too much. But as I move across the picture here, depending on where it touches the paper, I'm going to be getting a unifying linear shape. And that's what I care about. I want to tie the picture together. So I'll cut off this little extra. Remember, we used this before on our grape picture. Again, it has to be seated, so I'm using my fine mister to keep it wet. When it's wet and touches, then it absorbs the color and transfers the color. So you can see already some of the pink is rolling up into that area. Now down here, I'm going to pull it again. I'll cut another little piece off. Don't try to work with too much at one time. Give yourself a break. Okay, I think I'll do a little bit of a linear shape coming from here. And it's real easy to open up. This is the part I love. So now my linear shapes are touching every edge of the paper. Again, I'm going to dampen it with my fine mister. It only transfers the color if it's wet. Now it'll give me a line here on top of the paper. But on top of this wax paper, it's going to do nothing. But the line's going to start, or I should say end, and pick up again. And the lines are going to follow the movement, so it's still going to create this design, linear design, and that's what I care about. Now comes the fun. let's clear some, make way. Now we're going to let this painting paint itself. So I'm going to come in, first of all, with some of the same color I started with, some of my pink. I'm just going to let some of this float through here. So this time now it's going to go on the gauze. It's also going to go under some of this paper. It's going to pick up color when it hits all that wonderful en route. But the fun part is I'm feeding it underneath some of this stuff. So like I say, I started again with the pink. It's my permanent rose. And now I'm going to go into some of the ultramarine turquoise. When I put it on top of the pink, it becomes this very dark purple. And see, as I hold it, the color is wicking all the while down that gauze. So gravity is doing a lot of the work right now. And if you see your paper, if you're seeing hard lines, we don't want any hard lines. So we're going to soften the color with our mister and activate some of that color so it'll move. And see, I like all these soft edges. All the edges are pretty soft. The only edges that are really going to be crisp are where we've got some of these textures. So now for my final death-defying act here, I'm going to come in with a little mixed color. These are complements, the pink and the green. And I want to have some of my very darkest darks linking into my center of interest. And see, I think these are really dark, but you know what? There's going to be a surprise. They dry about 18% lighter. So push it as far as you can, because this is going to dry lighter, and you could be disappointed. So I'm painting around a shape here now. Keep that shape light. Here I'm painting almost negatively to create some little rock-like shapes. But remember, I don't care. If this picture doesn't want to be rocks, I'm going to let it be whatever it wants to be. So I think that's about as much painting as I need to do. I've developed my lightest lights, my darkest darks through my center of interest. I've got some areas that are restful. And I've got some areas that are really jumping with color and some that are blended and soft, grayed down. So I have quite a few elements that I think are going to be successful. We'll see. Time will tell. I have two other little things I want to do before we stop. One is I'm going to add just a little hint of salt here. And I usually like to add the salt going from the light into the dark. So like here's a perfect spot. It's fairly light. I'm going to run it through and link it with the dark. And I did it over here, so that kind of flows. And I think I'll have just a little bit through here, maybe coming off down here. But I never just shake salt on the whole thing. It should be selective. I have with me a couple of metallic oxides that I purchased just here. This one is a flex stone. I got it at a Menards store. And this is a Karlyn 18 karat gold plate. This was about $2.49. I got it at a Walmart. And I don't know why, I just happen to like this little metallic touch. So you can see where I started out with some of the gold, some of the quinacridones in here. I'm going to link a little bit of this spray right in here near my golds. So to me this is just one more little element of harmonic color. I also like spraying it into the gauze. And a little touch down here, I think. So there we have just a little hint of the metallic, and that will be difficult to paint over. And it's going to give us some crisp stencil edges. So I kind of like to get it particularly into the center of interest so we get that crispness and that the brightness. And then this one is really strange. It's kind of a texture, and it's in the green, blue-green area. So where I see some of the blue-greens, I'm just going to spray in here and create a little bit of texture into that blue-green area. And that's it. When we come back now, I'm going to take off all of the gauze, all of the wax paper, but I'm going to leave the en route paper right where it is and then glue it in place. Well, you can see I've been doing a little bit of work here as I left the video, and I started pulling in some more darks and some more detail to lead you through the painting. I tried to keep some of the rocks larger and some of the rocks smaller. Some of the rocks are in shadow and some of them are pretty much in full light. So I'm just going to go back and do a little bit more painting just so you can see it again. I don't want you to think I have any secrets here. So let's look again now. If I want to pull out just a little bit more detail in here, I usually do this in layers. So if I wanted this rock, if I wanted to start showing some more rocks in here, I would simply come around like this, start looking for these shapes, pulling them out. And all the while, I'm always thinking about the movement. So here I can make a little teeny rock. Here too I can have another little teeny rock. Two little teeny rocks, how about that? And here I can add another rock. Let's change the color a little bit, go a little bit greener. So this is this is the part I love. So you don't even have to look at a pile of rocks to do this. You can just keep trying to find these rock shapes. Maybe another one in here. Maybe another one in here. But then, as with any of these other areas, I like to come in, wet my brush, take most of the moisture off, and then come in and lose these edges. And even some of these shapes in here, I think they need to go underwater. So that's how I get some of these darker shapes. I actually let that color just kind of flow into the rocks, and they become a shade darker. Then as I get to the edges, I pull these shapes out and lose them. So I do like this lost and found element. And yet, now that you've seen me do that, you can see that I have begun to move the eye out to the edge here. And this is the area I wanted to touch off. So let's come in here and just do a few more in here. See, I can do a couple little dark shapes, maybe another little dark shape in here. Let's make this a nice long one here. Let's come down here. Ah, we made it to the end of the picture here. Again, let's lose these edges. Let's lose this a little bit more. You can still see that it's sort of a rock, submerged rock. But now we've brought the viewer's eye out, up, through, zigzag down, off the edge, and then up here over the top. And I think eventually I would even come in and go a shade darker up in here. Maybe a little suggestion here. To get the viewer off the top. Let's pull this into a darker shape up here. So you're in control. If you want to lead the viewer, you can lead them anywhere you want with these dark shapes. And that's a very simplified method of thinking about negative painting. So the last thing I want to do is wet this entire thing now and submerge it underwater. And that's still wet there, so I'm just going to kind of skirt around that. Went back to using my soft hockey brush. It's only been minutes since I've been working on this picture. Usually when you do this, you wait a little longer, or you might even take a hairdryer to really be sure the colors are bonded to the paper. But at this point, I don't mind if a little bit of the color moves. Now the first thing I want to do in this underwater wash is I would like to maybe add more of that golden yellow. That was my quinacridone gold. And I'm just going to give the feeling like the sun is coming through in some of this. So I'm going to, this is called glazing. I'm just going to glaze some of this sun over it. Wherever I put this, it's going to feel like the sun. Maybe I'll even go into a little bit brighter. This is my Windsor yellow. I'll pull a little down in here too. And maybe a little over in here. Oh, this is fun. I love this part. So now we've warmed it up with a little yellow. And I think I also want to add a little bit of the permanent rose in there too. So what I'm trying to do now is make it look like some of this, the sun is hitting it and some of it's underwater. So where I put the yellow, I'm just going to put a little bit of the warm color, keeping my warm colors together. So in this case, the pinks and yellows are pretty much in the same spot. Now to go underwater and to create shadow, I'm going to switch to my cobalt blue. So I'm going to come in here with some cobalt blue. You can clear a little spot here because I want this to be nice and clean. And I want to put right underwater, right in here. And this is how easy it is. Wherever I put the cobalt blue, it's going to go underwater. Now you don't want to see any hard edges. If you're seeing hard edges, that means your paper's drying. So I'm going to give this a little fine mist again because I don't want my paper to show me any hard edges at this point. Let's get a little bit more cobalt, nice big juicy bit of it. And let's put this part underwater here. Maybe I'll even float a little right in here underwater. See, this is drying again. Can't have that, so we'll just show them who's boss. Now I still want the light to be hitting in some areas, and particularly right through here. So I'm not going to put any glaze over that. I'm just going to do my glazing in selected areas. I think I would like to get this underwater up in here. That should work pretty well. So that's the concept. If you want to have the sun come out, you can put in some of your nice yellows, pinks, and if you want to submerge it, go into maybe some cobalts. And what I usually do is I work in the colors that I've already worked in when I began the piece. So there would be our completed painting. For my last demonstration today, I'm going to be working with this Japanese Masa paper. And a lot of people have asked about the process, how to do this paper, because it's a beautiful paper. It leaves these wonderful fractured lines. And I think it's an ideal way to learn negative painting because you're not necessarily getting hard edges when you paint around something. You're actually getting some of the soft edges. So I'm going to show you the process. In my book, Watercolor Fun and Free, I have just a double-page spread here about using Masa paper, but I'm showing the traditional Japanese way to do it. So what I want to do today is I want to show you another way to do it. The Masa paper itself comes with a very flat side and a very smooth side. It's perfectly obvious when you feel it. In the traditional way, you work on the rough side. But I've been experimenting and I've come up with a little variation on this. And I actually prefer to work now on the smooth side. So I'm going to take a pencil, but I can't find a pencil, so I'm going to use my pen. And I'm going to put a little X here on the smooth side. Because what happens after you wet the paper, you have no idea what is smooth and what is rough. So I have a nice little bowl of water here. We'll move this in so you can see. And to create all those fractures, you have to literally break the sizing on the paper. Now whatever you do, don't fold it in equal ways. Try to keep this pattern very random. So I just kind of move in from the edges and create quite a, this is good, you can get all your aggressions out. And make sure it's good and soaked. And then I'm going to squeeze it so that I'm really fracturing it. And the paper is quite fragile, so you have to handle it very gently. You can see I'm working on a half sheet size. And the paper has to be mounted to another piece of paper. Now a lot of people use mat board. I prefer to use a flexible surface like a piece of watercolor paper. So I've just got 140-pound watercolor paper here. Now I have to be sure that I've got my smooth side. There it is, there's my little X. So I'm just going to mount this paper right onto this half sheet of watercolor paper. And I'm going to do it half at a time. Now usually they use wheat paste, but I don't like to use wheat paste. It gets smelly after a while. So ideally I would use vinyl wallpaper paste, but in downtown Washburn, Wisconsin, there is nobody selling vinyl wallpaper paste. So you can see I'm just using Elmer's glue and a cheap brush. Whatever you do, don't use your good brush. I'm going to wet it with a little water because the glue itself is a little bit thicker than I need. So by diluting it with just a little bit of water in my brush and smoothing this out all the way to the edge, I'm going to mount the paper. Now in the traditional Masa paper style, you would paint the paper first, then glue it. This is the part that I never liked. You lose some of the color. So what I've done is I do all this part first. And I use a brayer to smooth it out. So you can see starting from the center, working out to the edge, I'm going to take and smooth this out. I'm going to try to get as few little pockets and wrinkles as possible. So working my way to the edge, center to the edge, center to the edge. And what's going to happen is we're going to get glue that oozes out. So I'm going to pick up the extra glue on my brayer. Make sure that stays clean. Then I'm going to mop up any extra glue here because I'm going to start painting on this right away, so I don't want to get any of this glue in my good brushes. Now we're going to repeat that on the other side. And make sure you get enough glue down here. Again, I'm going to dampen my brush with a little water. I'm going to smooth it out. So we've got a nice, even penetration of glue here, up to the edge. This has to be glued down almost perfectly or you're going to be disappointed. So it's worth taking the extra time to do a good job. So here we go, center to the edge, center to the edge, center to the edge. And in just a few minutes, we've got it mounted. So I'm going to make sure. Now the glue part. This is the part that I worry about. Make sure you get all the glue off your brayer and all the extra glue off the edges, because those watercolor brushes can't take a joke. When they get full of this glue, you're in trouble. You just lost a $80 brush. Okay, so now we're ready to go. This is the best part. What we want to do now is get color on here so we can really activate all those little fractures. If you walk away and let this dry, you're going to lose the fractures. You have to get paint down right now while it's wet. In fact, the wetter it is, the more fractures you become evident. So I'm actually going to take my fine mister and dampen this a bit to make sure that I'm going to soak some color into those fractures. I'm going to start with my lightest light. This happens to be my Windsor yellow. And in this lesson, this is the most difficult lesson of all of them, because now I'm going to be going between negative and positive. If you remember the first lesson I did, we painted all the positive shapes. I didn't actually demonstrate it, but I showed the pictures. I drew and painted all the images, then I went, masked it, and painted the background. That's pretty easy because you're only dealing with one thing at a time. Here I'm going to be painting some positive and some negative all at the same time. So I'm going to start out again here with some nice, bright, happens to be my Windsor yellow. And for example here, right now I'm painting what would be a positive shape. I've got my little value study here, and you may have recognized these shapes as sunflowers. So I'm going to go between positive shapes, such as this, and negative, where I start to paint around shapes. So we're going to go in and out, some positive, some negative. I even brought some sunflowers along. Down in here I'm going to have another sunflower. So I'm going to paint some of it like a positive shape, but then I also want to get that color into the background, because then when I paint over this color with blue, I'm going to get greens. So like I say, I'm going in and out, positive, negative. As soon as I get in what's my center of interest, I go a little bit darker. As soon as I move out into the edges, I add more water and I go a little bit softer. Now I'm going to move around and put some harmonic color down. This is my quinacridone gold. Beautiful, beautiful color. So in my center of interest, I'm going to add some positive shapes. And I'm going to add just harmonically right on top of some of the color that's already here. But then maybe I want to come in and create some negative shapes too. So if I come in here, if I want to create what would look like a stem, I can paint around the outside and create what's starting to look like a stem. But because I want to deal with all these edges and keep them soft, I'm going to just come in with water and just soften that into a nice golden tone. Here too, I just want that to be kind of a background color, but I don't want that hard edge, so I'm just going to soften it with some water. I'm going to go back in my center of interest again, so this time I'm going to come in with some brighter color. Ooh, that's bright. That's about as pure as you can get. This is like the centers right here. These would be like some of the shapes of the petals coming out. And this could be just anything here. So as soon as I'm happy that I've gotten the gold worked throughout the piece, which I am, it's more intense in my center of interest, a little softer in the background. Now I'm going to move into another harmonic color. Ooh, boy. Whew, look at that one. This is Scarlet Lake. Ooh, this is bright. So let's work some of this, for example, into some of the centers here. And over here, harmonically, we'll work some of that into the center. And maybe over here. But then I want some of this to be background. So I'm going to dampen my brush with just water, and I'm going to work some of this into just background color. Lift up a little. That got a little bright there, so we'll lift a little of that up. And I think I want to pull a little of this color into the edges over here. Sometimes we want some positive shapes. How about another almost linear positive shape coming up? And then let's make some more of these, we don't know what they are, shapes. Something interesting. Wet our brush, let that edge just kind of float away. Now comes the scary part. I'm going to switch to a round brush. Notice I was working with my 1.5 inch brush because I wanted big, broad strokes. The idea of you start your painting with a mop and you end with a needle. So I've just mopped in some of our big shapes, the movement, harmonic colors. Now I'm ready to think about getting some of the darks. And I'm going to start thinking about the mid-tone darks first. So if you look at my little value study, this 40% value here is the one I'm thinking of. So I'm going to start with some just pure Antwerp blue. And as I come in, I'm going to be defining what's going to be some petals. Several petals together here. I'm also going to be defining what could be the trunk. And so this is pure negative painting, where I paint around and create that shape. I did it earlier in the yellow. Now I'm coming in and making it a little bit darker. So we're just going to have fun painting around some of these shapes. This could become like the heart-shaped leaf. And as we start moving through the picture here, creating stems and various shapes, we're going to reach a point where we don't know. I'm at it right now. I'm not sure where I want to go next. So one of the things I don't want to do is stop and have all these hard edges just sitting there. What you do when you don't know what to do with an edge like that is you wet your brush, give it a little shake, and then you come in and you just soften it. So when in doubt, fuzz it out. See what I'm doing here? I'm just losing this edge so that some of that color is kind of blending out here. Same over here. I don't know where that's going right now. So let's just soften it. So when in doubt, fuzz it out. And meanwhile, now I've got a little time to gather my thoughts and decide where I want to go with this. One of the things I want to do is I want to develop now this darker pattern, dark to mid-tone pattern through here. So I'm going to create another linear shape here, almost like some more branches or something coming out. And then every now and then I'm going to bump into what's going to be a petal shape. So we'll make it into a petal shape. Now this is negative painting. I'm painting around the shape to make it into what's going to become the positive shape. So when I paint around these shapes, you're going to see the positive shape emerge. But uh-oh, look at what's happening. I gotta quick get my brush wet, lose these edges, because these aren't anything. That's what I call the taint area. Taint positive, taint negative, just lose it. Because the only edges I want my viewer to enjoy are the ones I've just created here. So I'm going to lose those. Now I can breathe again, think about where I want to go with this. So I'm going to come in again. This time I'm going to come in from the top of my paper. And I'm going to create another almost like stem-like shape. Come in here. And as I move along, I can come in and create more of these petals. And in here now, one petal from one side leads into another petal on this side. This could be quite interesting. And if you haven't had a lot of experience with negative painting, you might even want to do a sketch ahead of time. That would not be cheating. That would just be making your job a little bit easier. But I wanted this to be kind of a let it happen kind of demonstration. So I'm still thinking now about creating some of these shapes that are going to be petals and some shapes that could be anything in the background. But I can turn this shape into a positive. See, I could make this into some kind of maybe shadow-like petals, maybe some kind of a stem. And then whenever I don't know what to do, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to fuzz it out. Now the only time you get that crackle, that obvious crackle, is when you force some of that color into that cracked sizing. And in the white areas you don't see the crackle. So one of the things I like to do is to come in here with a little bit of color, move it around, make sure it's really, really wet, so it's forcing it into the crackle. But see, I don't really want to lose that as a white, so I'm going to take a tissue and lift it away. And meanwhile, I actually did get to see some of that crackle developed. Same down here. Now I want this to be a soft area that really doesn't have much happening, but I still would like to see some of that crackle here in that stem too. So what I can do is put a little bit of color, in this case the cool color, work it in, then I can come back and lift it away with my tissue. So what I'm getting, you're going to see the crackle, but I can take it back to the white of the paper. So I'm very, very concerned about that. I want to keep my rest areas restful. Okay, I'm still thinking about my mid-tone dark pattern. I've connected with the top. I've come through here. I think I'm going to go off here and around a bit. And I'm going to come out over here, but I'm just going to reach out with some shapes. rather than negative. I'm going to keep these shapes over here more positive. Some of them a little bigger than others. Some of them kind of long and stringy. I'm still basically working with my Antwerp blue. And as the Antwerp combines with the yellow, it'll turn green. As it combines with the some of these orangey colors, it'll become much darker. And as I get closer to the heart of this picture, I'm now going to start getting darker. I love some of these little rectangular shapes in here. So I'm going to play with that a little bit. And my paper's getting dry. When the paper dries, I'm not going to see these crackles. And I still want to continue working with this with kind of a wet into wet, soft edges. So again, dampen it with your fine mister and just continue painting. I'm going to green this up a bit. So I'm just having fun, letting things happen. I'm trying to keep now a movement, a steady movement that's going to start identifying how I'm going to get off the paper down here. You can see I've got a pattern that comes across. So I'm going to start identifying this by negatively painting around it. But I'm going to let the bottom of the stem just happen as a positive. So I'm going into my quinacridone burnt orange right now. So that'll come out there, and there, maybe over here. It's negatively painted here, it's positively painted here. I also want to use this wonderful quinacridone color to do some of the centers on the sunflowers. So we're going to come over here now and identify that as a dark center. And then I'm going to move over here and identify this as a dark center. And over here. Now I do have a little bit of this color in the background. Another thing I'd like to do is to put this color in with my green. So when I take quinacridone burnt orange and I mix it with Antwerp blue, I get a very wonderful olivey green. So this is kind of my mid-tone dark. And these edges down here I've got to lose while they're still wet. So you can see the beauty of working on this paper. It's really fabulous. Gives you these nice soft edges, very easy to make shapes. And you can see I can lose the edges just by coming in with the water. So now I've completed my mid-tone pattern of darks. So the last thing I want to do now is come in and make my darkest dark green pattern. So I'm going to start close to my center of interest because this is where you want your darkest darks. You can see what happens when you take compliments. Whoa, you've got dark. My paper's still wet, so the color is still moving. And what I'm going to do is work in a little pattern of my darkest darks, moving through the center of interest, linking, sometimes painting around. Sometimes these darks are going to be actually a positive shape. Sometimes a negative shape. So we're going in and out. Positive, negative. I still want to connect this shape, my darkest shape, with the edge of the paper. And see, each time I do this, I can create another shape within that. Over here, I want to link a little bit of this dark, move it along. Maybe I'll come out here and form a positive, maybe some kind of a branch. So sometimes lines, sometimes shapes, sometimes dark, sometimes little shapes, sometimes big shapes. So now this would be a good time to quit and allow this to dry and to evaluate it and decide if there's anything else I want to do to it. Well, this is the last demo that I did, and I did have a little time to work on it. It still needs more work, but it was time to show what we had. And as you can see, I did come in and layered several layers here, trying to build up not only the shapes going up, but a few shapes moving across horizontally. And then I tried to work on my dark pattern, pulling the eye through, and I've added some positive shapes, as well as coming in with a few more negative shapes. We just had one lonely little stem coming down. I added several more in a leaf shape. So this is what you do. You just keep layering and layering and creating a deeper richness and balance. You can see there are multi-petals now happening between, even here, the petals coming out. Kept it on kind of a semi-abstract level again. And at any time, this paper is pretty tough. So for example, if I wanted to lift some color away, just using a brush that's got a little more of an abrasive quality, I can come in and lift the color. Because see, there's that glue on the surface a little, and that will allow you to do that. So for example, if I wanted to lift out another petal over here, I could just simply come in, wet the area, and lift the color away. So it's kind of nice to know that at any time I can get a little lighter. It's another way of finding lights. There's a lot of tricks for finding lights, and believe me, I've been cultivating every one. Because in the old days I was an oil painter, now I'm convinced that watercolor is what I want to do. But it's so easy to go too dark. So with lifting, stenciling, layering, you can usually arrive at your final destination. So here we'll take a quick look at this in a mat. It always helps the painting. I hope that these little tips that I've been sharing with you will be helpful in your journey learning more about negative painting. And coming up next, we're going to have Bonnie Broitzman, who's going to share her style of working with negative painting. She's really a negative painter. We've painted together for over 20 years. She's painting negatively, I'm painting positively, and after 20 years, we're both getting a better balance in our work. So I hope you enjoy Bonnie, and thank you for joining me.
I'm going to begin a little 4-step demo in negative painting now. Now that you have a sense of what my work looks like, you have a sense of the fact that I need to break it in a minimum of 2 steps, an underpainting to glow through as I put the negative painting on top. But in this one, I'm going to slow it down into about 4 steps so you can see the progression. It's not my goal to make a finished painting. My goal is to translate some of the things I would do in the quiet of my studio, in other words, the techniques or the stages, so that I can present it to you so you can practice some of these yourself if you would choose to. I've got the back of the paper. I have a large brush and clean water. I'm going to start wet and wet. And as you know, I've got to wet the back first so that the paper doesn't roll and buckle. I'm putting water evenly on the back, and then I will turn it over and do the same thing on the front. I almost exclusively use Arches 140 paper. It says Arches right down here, so I know it's the front. I'm putting the water on very evenly. I like this stage. It reminds me to drop my outside world and my anxiety. The phone is off. I'm moving away from day-to-day life and I'm moving into this interior life. And I'm going to allow myself to be free from any outside thoughts, which I can't do in front of a camera, of course. But if I were home, I would really quiet myself down. So this could be a lovely expression of my paint, the colors at their best, line and shape at its best, so that I can paint as lovely a piece as possible. Let's kind of stick with that kind of hollyhock feeling. It might be easier to translate that as we go along. And again, all of my sources are now interior sources. It's memory. I'm going to just start to put this on. The beginning of this is going to be done with these 3 chisel brushes, starting from large, medium, small. The very end will be done with a round brush. And as I said earlier, I'm going to not probably use this. I'll probably just use this little small one for the final detail. Okay. I'm beginning, and I'm thinking about my paint. I'm going to start and go from light to medium to dark. I'm starting with a number of yellows. It doesn't matter which ones you choose. This will look very light to you. It should be, because what I'm going to do is paint anything I want warmed up in yellow and keeping my whites from being stark. I'm not a real fan of mascoid. And I've developed this process because I don't have to stop and put that on. I don't have to let it dry. And I never have to take it off. So this suits the way I paint in kind of an all one-step method. There's yellow. Now I could take as many yellows. Matter of fact, I've developed kind of an around-the-world attitude to color. Which one of these could I leave out? None. I put them all in. I'm not really interested anymore in limited palette or color schemes or any of that. I don't think anybody needs to be left out of a global society, so I put them all in there. I just let some talk more in this picture and then others get a voice in the next picture. So I would do that. Then I would move to my oranges, and if I want a positive flower, I would take a big bite. And I would throw in lots of color. And later on, that'll be chiseled. And remember my sense of going up in different sizes? I'm going to put that in. And I'm going to balance this color. I'm thinking in terms of, got to get some of that color into that background. And as I move along, I'm going to realize that I want my edges to have some of this same flavor. I'm going to move to some reds. So I've got my yellows, my oranges. And again, I can use that same quality. There's some little buds. I might want to come through and have a larger one. And I might pull in a red next to it to give it a little sense of darker. This is alizarin. Okay. Then I'm going to flush that out a little bit and use some of that beautiful tone in the background. Now I'm going to move and cool this down a little bit. It's pretty warm. I'm going to just keep moving towards my purples, changing that so it's more entertaining when I complete this. It'll be much more entertaining. Again, I'm thinking in terms of balance and rhythm, going off the edges. Now I'm going to put just a little blue in here to balance it and cool it down. Where I hit the green, yellow of course, it'll be green, just like in color printing. I will get these overlays. And as I do that, this is going to be the quiet underpainting. It's the stuff that's behind the flowers that are in front. I'm looking at you, but out there in my garden there's a whole bunch of flowers behind. So this is the things that I would see behind. At this point, if I choose, I might mix a little green right on my palette, but probably not. I'm keeping it pretty primary. That instantly cools this down. And I want to make sure I have connected with the edges. Maybe my paper relax a little bit. Okay, there's an edge there. Got one here, so we don't want to go straight across. Let's get up here a little bit more. Pull this down. And warm, cool, orange, red. That's nice. And this is that chisel. Okay, so there is stage 1 moving to stage 2. You can see it has emotional content, it's warm, it has balance, it has rhythm, but mostly it has energy. I could stop and do 5 or 6 of these, and I could put them up in my studio and I could let them tell me what they want next. I could actually take a pencil and draw on top, and those are really good exercises. There are things that help me learn how to do that. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep right on going. I'm going to put the big brush away and downsize one and begin to cut in some of this negative painting. Now take a look. I've got a yellow on my palette, and I've got a little Antwerp on my palette, and I'm going to let this green of these move back and forth. I'm going to chisel around, if you will, and let you see the necks of some of these blossoms themselves. I'm going to let you see some of the stems as more positive. Oh, I think I went to gladiolus. I was telling you it was... Hey, it wanted to be gladiolus. It didn't want to be hollyhocks today. Oh, that's all right. Now that's a lot more positive and negative painting simultaneously. This brings up a good point. I'm dancing with 2 feet. I'm doing negative painting, and I'll show you that. That means I am cutting around. See this? I'm cutting around, making background. That's background now. And what's left are blossoms. See those blossoms in there? Frame it on the other side a little bit. There we go. Now you can see right where that gladiola stem is. That would be negative painting. Let's put some over here and show you. There's lots of yellow, so I can use more blue because they're going to tone it down. Show you how I frame that one. See where that one lives now? Because I've gone around it. That relates back to all the drawing. Here's a white one. Go around that. That's negative painting. Now, positive painting would be just the opposite. I want to show you a stem, okay? Here, these have beautiful long stems. Let's put some in. Sometimes they go down, sometimes they go up, sometimes they very dark underneath where those shadows are. And I could be a positive stem, see? That's positive and negative painting all in one stroke on damp paper. Now you can see that this picture is becoming very clear. As a matter of fact, this was one of my lifelong goals in painting. I wanted to stand right in front of a bouquet of beautiful flowers and catch exactly how people feel about them when they want to go up and stick their nose in and smell them. I wanted that urgency, that quick moment caught on paper. And that's why I've developed this technique. So it's somewhat intuitive, and it's a great deal of negative painting. Now at any time I want to, I can bring this tissue in because this is wet paper. And if I've lost some, I can just lift out lovely little blossoms. Let's take this spot where it's real dark and let you see how a clean tissue will allow just some white gladiola buds walking right up that paper. Now when that's dry, I can put the little stem in there, and that white balances that. So I'm continually concerned about that. So now I am definitely 50% of the way through this painting. So we're on to stage 3. So I'm going to put this big medium brush away and move down here to my smallest 1/2-inch chisel. Here's where I'm going to probably get a picture of gladiolas, or perhaps actually hold a gladiola stalk in my hand, because that's going to give me really good and true information. I'm going to mix up a green here using my yellow and my Antwerp, and I'm going to buzz over here and get just a little bit of red, just to knock it down when I want it duller. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to fine tune this. I want it even duller than that. See that palette gray, sometimes people call that? And I'm chiseling in and I'm giving you the sense of this deep space. That would be stage 4. I'm trying to design these negative shapes. What's going on behind, still leaving this beautiful color. If I have a passage of absolutely beautiful color, I don't want to lose it. If I have a really beautiful shape, I want to save it, because that's what this is all about. It's about designing and shaping all immediately, like dancing is itself. It's a physical, exciting process, and I want to be a part of it. And if I've gone too far, lift it out. See? And then when that's dry, I can tuck in that last bit. Now, the very end of this picture would need this paper to dry. So I would set this aside. I'm open to beauty, I'm open to color, I'm open to line, I'm open to design. What's going to happen? And I took about 45 minutes to lay in all these bright, fresh colors. And the final thing really shows what I did with the little brush after the paper had dried sufficiently. I came in here, and remember that dark trail that leads you around? That's what I put in at the end of this. I framed in what I wanted to say, just like my life. I want my watercolor to express my inner spirit and my personal view on life. My personal view is that color, line, watercolor itself, they're all beautiful, and they reflect a beautiful world, and I want to put that in. It frames me, it holds me through times that are not as beautiful in real life. So watercolor is a real gift to me. It's a real pleasant experience to me. I love to teach it. I love to paint. And I hope you'll try some of these exercises and get really involved with letting go and using the paint in a very free, intuitive manner. Thank you.